Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be looking at kanji and some techniques to get started with how to study kanji and how to remember kanji. I'm going to be going through some of the resources I use, some of the websites, some of the books, and finally some tips and tricks. So there's a link here, the tiny URL to the Google Doc, so you can open up what you're seeing now on your screen. And today is 10日12月2018年. So first off, I'll just talk about how I learned kanji. So I had a few sources of kanji. You really need some textbooks, I think, plus you need to be looking at real Japanese source materials to practice your learning. So the first book that I really used is this one. It's just called Shogaku Kanji Renshu, so primary school kanji practice. And also it says Chugaku de narau kanji. So also you can learn some of the kanji that you are supposed to learn in junior high as well. Now this is a book meant for Japanese natives, so there's no English in it. It's quite tricky, but of course if you can complete this book, your kanji is the same same level, I guess, as a Japanese person. And this is a book actually that you use for juku, okay, for cram school. So this is actually my host brother's book, and he didn't need it anymore, so he gave it to me. So this is a very good book. It's pretty standard though. It doesn't really group the kanji in any particularly good way. It just kind of follows the Japanese system, which, as I'll explain later, is not really the best way to learn it. But it does teach you all the readings, and it basically has the kanji laid out. Then it has tests as well, and I really like the tests. They're quite good. And then it just keeps going. Then there's an index at the back. So a pretty standard kanji book, but very complete, and there's lots of information. Doesn't leave out any readings, and it tests you on all the exception readings. The next book I have on the list here is an AFS beginner kanji book. And AFS stands for American Field Service. It's the group that actually sent me to Japan. They do exchange. So I don't think I've got this book anymore. It was pretty basic though. I think there's probably about 100 or 200 kanji in there. But using that book, I was able to pass, it was called level 3 back then for the JLPT. But again, I was using that Juku book as well. So it's a pretty standard book. I wouldn't really say there's anything good about it. It just kind of listed a lot of kanji, but it didn't really have any exercises or anything. It was not very good in that sense. Next one is flashcards. Okay, I used these quite a bit when I was in Japan. I made my own, and eventually when I got basically when smartphones came around, I got flashcards apps on there. I found flashcards really, really useful. And of course I just had a paper dictionary which I would use to look up stuff. I was in school over there, so when people said stuff I would think about the words. Alright, the last book that I used is this one. It's basic kanji book. Okay, now this is actually volume 2 and it's got 500 kanji in it. But volume 1 also has 500, so I was up to about 1,000 when I was using this book. I didn't really use this when I was in Japan. I used this after I got back from Japan. One of my teachers gave this to me actually. So this is a very good book, and this is the kind of kanji book I would generally recommend that people get, because it does the usual stuff where it just lists the kanji and you've got some space there to draw them. And then it straight away is getting you to write them and then read them. And then it has more kind of worked examples where it's a longer dialogue using all the kanji in that section, and you have to answer some questions. And what I really like about this is it tends to use a lot of materials that you would find in Japan. So you kind of get used to reading them as you would see them in Japan. It gives you little cultural things as well. It teaches you stuff like this, very important for the JLPT, the kind of standard greetings you get in New Year's cards as well, which is good. So it's also got stuff like this as well, which are actual signs you would find in Japan, so you kind of get used to reading it like that. So I think overall this is a very good book. I spent a lot of time studying from this, and it's generally pretty good, but we'll look at some other things as well. Alright, so I did it the pretty traditional way. I had some textbooks, I used textbooks, and then I just tried to read whatever I could. Very early on I learned how to say, how do you read this in hiragana, or can you write this kanji for me? I learned how to say those two phrases, and I actually had a little basically a little flashcard pack I used to carry around with me, like a ring with all these phrases on it, so that I could bring that out. If I couldn't remember how to say it, I would have that phrase and I would be able to ask people. So I really kind of got into the kanji quite early on, and I think that's quite important. Okay, and then I just kind of basically get a notebook like this, but I'm going to go through that in a bit more detail. But really, kanji, you're going to have to write a lot of them. You're not going to learn a kanji just by writing them once. So I know this is going to be very hard to see, but you see this is just basically filled with Japanese writing. Okay, just write the kanji over and over and over again. I used to try and write this, if it was a new kanji, write it 5 or 10 times, especially if it's a bit complicated. Okay, so that's basically how I did it, a combination of textbooks, but I'm not sure I would ever really recommend people to learn kanji this way. You are going to have to use textbooks, I would say, but most textbooks are actually pretty bad. And I mean, I think the basic kanji book is okay, but I'm going to show you this website called kanjidamage.com. Okay, I would say that this is the best resource for learning kanji that I've found. It basically teaches you kanji using radicals. Now this term radical, it's explained on what the website is, or what it is, but it's just a small part of a kanji, and then you kind of have these stories where you put the mnemonics together to make the kanji itself. So I would really recommend you check that website out now. It unfortunately doesn't group kanji according to JLPT level. So if you're an absolute beginner, you're going to learn a lot of kanji along the way, which you're probably not going to use for a bit of time. But I think the progression that this website goes through is one of the best ways I've ever seen to learn kanji, and it's a long-term way to learn kanji. It's not just you just kind of remember it and then you're going to forget it, how to write it in about a month or two. So it's a really good website. I would just go to the link as I put it here, read the introduction, see what he says. One thing I will say is the language is it's a bit foul. Let's just put it that way. He uses lots of jokes and crude language. Okay, so if you're a bit sensitive, I probably wouldn't recommend you go. There's a lot of swearing, but otherwise, apart from that, I think it's one of the best kanji progression websites I've ever seen, and it's free. So I would really recommend you check that out. When I think about myself right now, I'm not sure how many kanji I can read, but I would say safely I can probably read about 2,000 or so, maybe a bit higher, because I can, I know most of what's called the Joyo kanji, which is the kind of everyday use kanji, and I believe there's 3,000 something of those. So I can read quite a lot of those, and I'm doing N1 study, and I'll talk about that a bit later. So how do I do my own kanji study? Well, at the moment, up until recently, the exam was last week, but I was doing JLPT study. So this is very specific Japanese language proficiency test study because I wanted to pass that exam. And if you're going to take JLPT, I would generally recommend that you get a book which is produced for the JLPT. So this is the kanji one. This is called Nihongo So Matome. And this is a very good book. It sets kanji out. Again, not the best way. And it's not set out the most logical way when you compare it to Kanji Damage, but it does cover everything you need. And these books are very cheap as well, I believe. Well, yeah, this is 1,200 yen, so it's about $12 Australian. I mean, I got it shipped from Japan for I think $20. It was very cheap. And the amount, I've spent hours and hours and hours studying from this book. So for $20, for an exam resource of this quality, I think that's a pretty good investment. So yeah, so this is the N1. They also have a grammar section, a grammar book, sorry, and a vocab book, and I think they also have a reading comprehension book. Maybe that's a different series though, but at least they have those three. Okay, and these are very, very good books. I also have the grammar one. So my study is generally revolving now around using that Nihongo So Matome book, just revising it over and over again, and then also using Kanji Damage a lot to kind of check kanji which I'm not super sure about or I keep forgetting. So Kanji Damage is perfect for that, for teaching you a new way to look at the kanji. It often tells me things I've never noticed before about kanji, and I just kind of had this bad recollection. But normally I just read Japanese source material, so a lot of stuff from Asahi Shimbun. I know this is quite difficult, of course, but I'm trying to get a lot better, so I generally read quite hard things and then practice reading the kanji like that. But it is very hard to get started on this because you don't know if you're reading things correctly. Okay, now if you want to grab these textbooks, I would really recommend both of them actually, but the second one in particular, 日本語総まとめ, I would only really recommend it if you're considering doing JLPT, but it is a very good resource. So, especially the lower N5, N4, N3 books are very good. So you can click on these Amazon links here, they get shipped very quickly, and that's how I ordered them. And I think the basic kanji book is a bit pricier, but as you can see, it's quite thick. So there is a lot of material in here. It'll take you quite a long time. And yeah, if you did volume 1, basically when you get to about 300 kanji, you start being able to read quite a lot. And so obviously 500, 700, especially when I got to 1,000, when I finished this book, I felt very confident in my reading. And I was able to pass JLPT level 2 with this book, as well as I learned some kanji, of course, in uni. So what are some techniques involved with kanji? Well, first, the big thing with Japanese is you just have to be consistent with it, all right? There's thousands and thousands of kanji. They've got lots of readings, so there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of combinations. So it's all about just trying to do it every week, a little bit every day, a little bit every week, and just learn a few kanji at a time, and then leave it for a day or two, come back and revisit them. This is why I actually kind of like this 日本語総まとめbook, because you've got some kind of learning and then there's a test. And so I normally used to do the learning, leave it for at least 12 hours and then do the test. So I was just trying to do a little bit and then do an hour or so of study, revising like that. Now kanji, it's a written script, okay? It's a complex written script. So you're going to have to write them out quite a few times. You're not just going to learn them the first time you ever read them or write them. Getting a notebook like this, and just, I bought this one particular. It's small, it's spiral, so it's easy to turn the pages. It doesn't get bent in my bag or whatever. It's got a hard cover, so it doesn't get damaged, and I can just bring this wherever I want. It's very light, so it's worth getting a notebook like this because you want to be writing things out a lot of times. You want to be testing yourself, so this is why these textbooks are really good. They often choose the common kanji that people make mistakes with. They're going to test you on those, so you want to be having those and just try and find a Japanese person or maybe someone like me who can mark these things for you. The NHK Easy articles, I've done videos on these before on the channel. You can find them. Look at these. I've got a button where you can turn the furikana off and on, so you can practice reading it and then turn the furikana back on to see if you are correct or not. So that's basically a constant supply of articles being produced by that website. So I would use that as some study. Otherwise, just generally all your reading and things like this, you can use to practice your kanji. But it's really about constant, consistent practice. So then, I made a big lifestyle change. I just made a decision that I wanted to get a lot better at Japanese. So I used to just try and, whenever I had free time, I would do Japanese study. So I used to catch the bus quite a lot. So that was an hour and a half or so every other day I was on the bus. So I used to spend that time basically always just doing flashcards on the bus. It's not easy to write stuff on the bus, so I would do a lot of flashcards. And then if I had some other free time, I would often not watch movies or anything like this and just spend the time studying instead, because I had very limited time, so that's what I used to do. So yeah, this is why phones are great, because you can just open up the flashcard app pretty quickly. Alright, that wraps it up from me. Hope these tips and tricks helped you out. Kanji is hated by a lot of people, but I think it's one of the best ways to improve your Japanese if you spend a bit of time on it, because your vocabulary is just exponential going up because of all the different combinations kanji can have, and it just allows you to read. And I'm always of the opinion you're only going to get good at speaking Japanese if you can kind of get native speakers or native Japanese into your head. And one of the best ways to do that is to read. So if you can't read that many kanji, it's really going to hinder your ability, because very few texts which are interesting enough to read, they're always going to be written in kanji. So you kind of need that. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Hit a like if this video helped you out. Share it with your friends, and have a look at those textbooks on Amazon if they tickle your fancy. Thanks again, guys. See ya.